Oh, my hair's sticking all over the place. Excuse me today. Hi, this is Carol from Healthcare Potholes with Christian Faith. Wanted to talk a little bit about my dad's last few days on this earth. And I had started Healthcare Potholes right after he had passed. I was looking for a website to start a blog, and then I sort of put it on the back burner and opened up my pet supply business, allspoiledrottenpets.com. And I've been up and open for 4 months and haven't sold a pet supply. And I have everything from wild bird, cat, dog, small animal, horse, mule, donkey, pony, livestock, poultry, that type of thing. So it's kind of a one-stop shop deal under the roof. I don't do reptiles. I had to draw the line somewhere, and I wanted to include livestock. Back in the 80s, I had two dogs, and I had a friend that had a horse, and I was having to go get horse supplies and feed and different things while I was at home and off during the day, except for working in home care, and then I had dogs to care for. So I lived in pet stores, feed stores, saddlery shops, different things like that. And so I decided, they need to have a store under one roof. And so I kind of tucked it away, and it just seemed like a good time to start a business up like that, an online business, e-commerce with drop shippers. And so that's kind of what I have. So it's all online with drop shippers. So I don't house any of the products or anything. They just come straight from the supplier, and they're the same supplier that services Chewy and PetSmart and the other stores like that, Petco and whatnot. So anyhow, getting back to my dad and his illness, he had a stroke back on July 3rd at 9 in the morning, and we sent him to the hospital because there's a 2 hour window that they can give a clot busting drug if you have a stroke. Now, if you're on blood thinners, they can't do that. My dad was on blood thinners for AFib, so they couldn't give him the clot busting drug. But his stroke was between the temporal lobe and the occipital lobe. So he had a vision distortion going on the one side. And he would go to try to eat, and he would hit the edge of the bowl because he just couldn't see unless you fed him on the other side, which took me a while to figure out what was going on with him. And then when they told me where a stroke was, it made perfect sense. But getting it pulled out of the medical staff was almost nearly impossible, and finally they told me where it was. But he started out in the Beaumont system, and we ended up sending him to a rehab, and that was the start of his demise. They laid him flat. His stomach slipped up to his chest. He started having aspiration pneumonias. They had tied him down to where they stopped the circulation to his foot, and it was black on the heel, and then he was going to have that amputated. He had stage 2 sores from top to bottom, which I took pictures of over at VA when he got transferred over there. But it came to a Friday. I said to Gary, I says, you're dropping me off. I want you to go check on Dad. I know we were going to go up there later, but I want you to go see him now. So he did. And he came out and he called me and he says, Dad's in rough shape. I said, well, I'll call his doctor. So I called his doctor, and we were going to transfer him over to the VA, which we did do, but it took forever because there was a storm that came through and knocked a lot of the power lines down, and traffic lights were out, and it took forever to get anybody anywhere that day. It was bad, in all fairness. So we were waiting and waiting, and we finally went home, put the dogs out, and then headed over to the VA, and he finally got there. And they came to me and told me that my father had been dragged and he had tie marks on him, and was I aware of this? And I said, no, I was not aware of any of this. They wouldn't let me go in because of the mask mandate. Well, the VA had took their mask mandate off by that point with COVID. They were the smart facility. These other facilities are crazy. They're crazy. So anyhow, he you know, went into the VA, and then they fought me and called Adult Protective Services because my dad wanted to come home. He didn't want to go back to another hellhole. And while he was home, I got his sores from stage 2 to stage 1. The heel, I was still working on massaging around it and trying to get circulation down to that area to get it better. And he ended up with another aspiration. He just spiked a temp, and I sent him right back to the hospital in about 3 days. And he enjoyed his time at home for those 3 days. He was happy to be out of there and be home and around his family and his dogs. And as crazy as his dogs are, the carry-on in the living room there, he missed it. He missed it. He missed my brother and I going at each other at times, and he just missed it. He missed all the rigmarole, and he wanted to be back with all of it. And so some people like things and some people don't. But my dad, he missed all that. And he told me when he was home, he says, I'm glad to be back home. I have my large screen TV to watch, and this is perfect. He says, I'm right smack in front of it, and I can change the channel and do what I want to do. So he enjoyed being home. And so when he spiked a temp, I thought, oh, they'd just give him antibiotics and send him back home. Well, they didn't do that. They kept him. Gave him some IVs, and I had hoped he'd turn the corner and would be back home. I had no idea. Well, suddenly he wasn't doing good, and his stomach had slipped more up into his chest, and there was all sorts of things going on. They might have to amputate his foot because of the blackened heel, and I had called foot doctor in to have it looked at and to see what they thought, and they were like, oh my god, I don't know what to think of that. It was a puzzle to them. So anyhow, he it was his time to go at 96. He had put up a good fight to try to get better. And I was hoping I could get him rehabbed at home and get things going in the right direction. He had a walker. We had a wheelchair that we could use to get him to the bathroom and different things like that. So there was all sorts of things that we could do for him. And they just, they called Adult Protective Services because they didn't think we should have him at home. Well, that's not their decision. It was our decision as a family that we made not to put him back in another hellhole, and it was my dad's decision not to go back. So they called me and they said, well, he's really struggling to breathe today. We want to start a morphine drip. And we said, well, as long as it's really low, I don't want anything to, take Dad's life. So I said to the nurse I was really upset that they weren't starting him on Unison for his aspiration pneumonia because that's the only thing that works, and blah, 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 blah. And nobody offered to pull his hernia down and tack it down. And, they do that with dogs all the time. Why can't they do it with humans, So there was all this variances that were going on. And I don't know that he would have made it off the table, to be honest. And looking at him and everything, he was very frail looking. And so I gave it my best. And so they came to me and they wanted to put him in hospice. Well, he didn't want hospice. And I said, well, we'll talk to hospice and see what they have to say. Now, my cousin was a hospice nurse. Her daughter worked hospice too, and we were totally against it. So she hasn't called me much. I wonder why, But my parents had it in their trust, no hospice, no nursing home. So they were very specific about that. And I was trying to honor their wishes as their daughter and as their health care appointee for their health care needs that they had. And so I knew what they were, and I was standing my ground with all the people around, which made it look like I was an idiot, but it's what they wanted, and I was honoring their wishes in the end. So um, we were waiting for hospice to come in to see what they would say, and they did get my dad flagged before he passed, and they had a flag on him, and I was very happy about that. But I thanked them and asked if I could pay for the flag, and they said no, 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 no. And So I really feel that all veterans, regardless of which hospitals they're in, they should be flagged so we know that they served and the mortuary knows that they were a veteran so that they can provide the body with dignity and respect and get hold of the branch that they were in and take care of the military's services that they need to do. It just helps make things a little easier on the family if they know that. So, anyhow, my dad was not at a veteran hospital when he passed. He was in a non veteran hospital. So, he had the morphine drip going, and we pulled up into the parking lot. And I happened to look up into the fourth floor window, and they had been working renovating it. And I just kind of was wondering, I saw lights up there. I thought, that's odd. So I looked up there, and there was my mom gliding back and forth in the window, pacing like she would when we were late from a date getting home. And she had my cousin's sweater on that she had given her before she had passed, a blue and white sweater from Croatia. And then she had a white robe on underneath it, her gown, and there was Jesus behind her. And he slipped behind her and he went into the bed and he put his hands up behind his head as if to say, well, I'm just going to lay here for a little bit while you pace because they'll be along. I'm not worried. They'll be fine. And of course, we had a dog that went crate up before we left, and they were giving us a lot of attitude. And so we were running later than we wanted. And so my brother was getting my chair out and my walker, and he looked up and he saw what I was seeing, and he thought, wow. So we rushed into the hospital to see Dad. And my dad had a phobia to darkness, going down a dark tunnel. And so we were very concerned that he wasn't transitioning over because of this phobia that he had. He also had a phobia to heights. So, and as we were kids growing up, he would have us take the steering wheel and drive the car through the bridge, or the tunnel rather, excuse me, I misspoke, through the tunnel, because he couldn't handle the tunnel. He would close his eyes and one of us would have to take the wheel and steady the car going through, or my mom if we weren't in the seat and I was in the back seat or whatever was going on. So my brother, many years later, took my dad down to his class reunion and his wife, and I think it was in Potato City, Genesee. So they stopped off at Lake Chautauqua, they stopped off at the Lucille Ball Museum, and they did some things that were fun things on their trip down there. And my dad refused to go down into the dark room to see Lucille Ball's Emmy that she had gotten. And so Ray came to me and he says, you know, Dad wouldn't go down to see Lucille Ball's Emmy because he was fearful of the dark. I said, really? He said, did you know that? I said, no. I knew about the height, but I didn't know about that one. Now, my dad could climb a ladder and he was okay with that. But anything more than a step ladder, he was not okay with. You know, he painted our house in Fenton. So he was on like an extension ladder, but it wasn't, you know, to him that was okay. But heights any further, like when we went up in the point in Toronto, he would turn and face the wall inside and put me to face outside and say, okay, now what am I missing? So that's how my dad was, and that's how I remember him. Funny. And so I could, he talked about his Aunt Lena on his deathbed, and he talked, who owned a Lake Chautauqua Waffle House down in Lake Chautauqua, and with his grandparents. And they immigrated over from Sweden, and they would come in the summer and work the Lake Chautauqua Waffle House, and they would go back to California for the winter. And I'm not certain about Aunt Lena if she stayed in Lake Chautauqua year round or just what, but they did run a waffle kitchen down in Lake Chautauqua many years ago. And I had a cousin that lived on the actual lake of Lake Chautauqua, and he had a log cabin down there that was just beautiful. And they moved eventually to California as well. So I have relatives in California, and I have relatives dotted all over this country, it seems. So anyhow, they're dwindling slowly as we get into that age group. But we're we're strong. We're strong stock. And my mom and dad are together. And I knew that evening that my mom was there to help my dad down the dark tunnel. And 1 minute before hospice walked in, he transitioned over. And that floor was still locked out. I had told him to hold on. I wanted to go check something out. And he raised his eyebrow and he said, "Yeah, I'll hold on as long as I can. I can't promise, but I'll try." And he did. And I went down and I checked the elevator and it was still locked out. So that was Jesus and my mom up in that window without a doubt to bring my dad over to the light. And I knew he was going to heaven because he had Christian faith. He sang in the choir, the church choir for many years. He was a good tenor, and I know that the last few years he hadn't been going because I was concerned about the risers and him falling after he fell in the drive. And my brother was starting to take him to choir practice, and he said, he's unsteady getting up on the risers. I worry about it, sis. And I said, well, okay, we'll just tell him that he can't do that anymore unless they keep him on the flat ground and he can use his walker up there, then he can go and sing. He didn't want to do that. So, we sort of kind of fell away from the church at that point because I didn't want to have him wanting to get up there and do that and stuff. So there's a lot of decisions now that I look back that were the right decisions that I made at that time. And so he went peacefully with Jesus and my mom pulling him down the tunnel towards the bright light to go over to heaven. And in hospice had brought the flag and had flagged him and everything. And he went 1 minute before hospice, so I didn't have to make that decision, which he took out of my hands, which was nice. They did have it in their living trust not to have hospice or nursing home. So they would have home care, and they would go to a rehab to get some rehab on the equipment. But other than that, they didn't want it, basically. So it's hard when you're a kid doing what you have to do. But I'm just saying that God comes when you don't expect it. He does come when people are in need. And my dad was in need because he didn't want to transition and he knew he needed to transition. Now, people have asked, well, why didn't he get healed? Well, it was his time to go. I think my mom really missed him and wanted him there. I think Ray missed his dad. Um, I know they're up there with my mom's two kids that she had miscarried. I don't know what they look like. I'm kind of anxious to get up to heaven and see what they look like. But it is what it is. You have to trust God. You know that He's around, He's listening, He's watching, He's aware, and He's good. He's good. And they say that He's a Prince of Peace, and He is. And one thing I want to say is that when you get older, you can have people that really like the elderly population and take good care of the elderly population. And then you have people that have an attitude about it. I had quite a few people with my dad that had attitude, and I wasn't too happy with it. And I flared my tempers a few times, and sometimes as a nurse, you have to do that. Sometimes as a daughter, you have to do that. And sometimes you just have to stand your ground, and sometimes you have to hold your horses. And sometimes you have to leave things roll off your shoulders. So these are all things that I have learned with my parents being sick. Sure, malpractice occurred on them. And I'm outraged at the legal community not doing their job and going after these people to make it a better place. Um, they look at someone's age and they say, oh, their life is at 96 is done with. They shouldn't even be going after anybody. Well, that's not true. It doesn't matter what your age is. It's the quality of life you had when you got sick. So I want them to keep that in mind. My dad had a good quality. He was up walking around. He was going out and sitting in the garage watching the neighbor kids play. He was watering his garden. He was doing things. He was up and doing. Well, he wasn't good with paperwork anymore. I'm not either. Look at my table. So anyhow, I'm just saying. I'm not going to turn the camera on it because you would probably be fainting. So we're not going there. Um, but I'm just saying that there is so much to settle an estate. It is just mind-boggling. Um, and especially if you're struggling yourself with health, like I am quite often with blurred vision, it's very frustrating because you have to get things done at a certain time and deadlines, and then certain people have things going on. Like this just really floors me, and I'm just going to throw this out because I'm right at 20, and maybe I should do this in another video clip. Let me do it in another video clip. But let me say, God knows when you're in need. God knows when you're dying, and He knows when you need to be healed, and keep that in mind, that He knows when you're dying and He knows when you need to be healed, and He's there for you. And don't think He's not. And He may send another disciple down to bring you over. I don't know. I don't know how many disciples my dad had to try to get him down that dark tunnel, but it took Jesus and my mom to get him over. And and I chuckle about that every time I think about it. Boy, Dad, I can't wait to see you in heaven and have a chat. And I a few months after he had passed, I went into the living room. My dogs were carrying on. They had seen my dad's spirit in the living room. And of course, as soon as I walked in, he glided and went away. It was like, whoa, I just saw like the top part of him. And I was really shocked. So I know he's still around. And, it's beautiful. I had the song Go Rest High on the Mountain by Vince Gill played at his funeral because he is laid to rest on a mountain with my mom. So part of them, we had to send them through the mail, so we could only send half of their ashes through. So we sent half of mom and half of dad, and I have the other half to go down when I die. So, but I'm telling you, it's good. It's all good. It's all good. We're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. Even if we end up in a pup tent, because Jesus knows that. Jesus probably has a plan for us, and I just don't know what it is. But I'm here to ride with him on that horse to see what it is. So, anyhow, we'll talk later. Have a good one.